Question number 5, Deputy Maureen O'Sullivan.
Yes, thank you. My question is in relation to the Young People's Facilities and Services Fund, the work that it has done to date and your plans for the future of that particular fund.
Thank you, Deputy O'Sullivan. As you know, my department operates a range of funding schemes to support the provision of youth services to young people throughout the country. In 2014, 50.5 million was made available, including 750,000 capital funding. They support 400,000 young people involved in 1,400 youth work staff in 477 projects and 40,000 volunteers. Very sizable number of volunteers throughout the country working in these clubs. There's a range of projects supported under the one you mentioned, the Young People's Facilities and Services Fund, mostly in areas where there are significant drug problems or difficulties. The focus is on the local drugs task force, and these are in Dublin, Bray, Cork, Galway, Limerick, Waterford and Carlow, and the objective is to attract at-risk young people so that they can be diverted and be given alternative support. The fund aims to support young people in the 10 to 21 age group who are marginalised, and there's 242 projects supported by that. Typically they employ about 2 or more youth workers, and in 2014 you asked what amount of money will be made available to those projects. It's 18.4 million, and in addition funding of 1.15 million has been allocated to local drug task force projects in 2014.
Deputy O'Sullivan.
Yeah, thank you very much. I want to acknowledge all the work that has been done on the Young People's Facilities and Services Fund since it was set up back in 1997. And when it was set up then, I was chairing the group, and I still do, for the North Inner City, the development group there. So I know the difference that it has been making in terms of the facilities that went in, the people who are employed, and the programmes that they have been rolling out. And there's, you know, really amazing work being done by so many projects throughout the city. It did grow out of a particular situation, which was the drugs issue in those days, and the way in which drugs, you know, the drug dealers, they just targeted particularly vulnerable groups, and they had a ready-made population there with people because of disadvantage, including early school leavers and high rates of unemployment. In those days, I, as chairperson of the development group in the North Inner City, with the representative from Dublin City Council and the City of Dublin Youth Service Board, we went in and we met the National Assessment Committee frequently, and we had to go in and we had to account for our recommendations on funding, because the funding was particularly geared towards those who are most at risk. Now, we can say everybody is at risk, but we do know that there are communities that are most at risk, and that's where that fund was being directed. So we had to account for that, and we had to ensure to the National Assessment Committee that the funding was going where it was most needed. So the National Assessment Committee had a very important role in monitoring. Now, I think one of your replies to them is that there's no need for them to meet because there's no further funding coming on board, but they have a very important role in monitoring. So I'm asking the Minister if she will if she will agree today to calling a meeting of that National Assessment Committee from that point of view, monitoring.
Thank you, Minister.
Well, Deputy, you mentioned your own area, and as you know, 1.7 million has been provided in 2014 to projects in the North Inner City under both rounds of the Young People's Facilities and Service Fund. 715,000 has been provided under round 1, and a further 985,000 is being provided under round 2. And I have the individual allocations, which I'll forward to you. I'll correspond with you directly in relation to the point that you make about the National Assessment Committee, because I don't have the details. I'll be happy to correspond with you and take up the points that you make.
The National Assessment Committee, it does have representatives from all the main players, and they're looking at the broad issue, but it is vital that the funding continues to go to where it is most needed. So I'm glad that you have made that commitment here. The other aspect is that I understand that there's going to be 6 million or something for positive mental health projects, and I do think that there is a role for the youth services in that. And again, I know I just mentioned to you before that when the Young People's Facilities and Services Fund had a small grants fund, you know, that there were projects that just needed maybe a few €100, maybe €1,000 for a particular piece of work, and it's all around the prevention and education pillar, which is part of the National Drug Strategy. And I think it's a pillar, you know, we put the money, the treatment and rehabilitation, the supply control, which is all after the event, and I don't think we have enough emphasis on prevention and education, which is what this is about.
Thank you. Final reply, Minister.
Well, I mean, I can only agree with you and say that it is extremely important that if there is funding for mental health and young people, that the youth work groups and the youth projects are involved and get support from that fund as well. There's no doubt there's a hugely preventative role played by all of these youth services, and I would include the Garda Youth Diversion Programmes in this, where the figures that the research that we have is showing, really high levels of success and actual diversion from criminal activity. And so the focus on, I very much agree with you, the focus on prevention and early intervention is critical. And I can only assure you that in all of these projects, and there are many of them, including the local youth club grant scheme, the one I've discussed already with you, the Young People's Facilities and Services Fund, the special projects for youth, the local drugs task force projects, all of these are really very much following the line that you've outlined in relation to early intervention and support to young people, particularly those young people who are at risk.
Thank you, Minister. Now, other questions?